Bring you our weekly roundup of the big stories in the world of aviation. We're joined today by the editor of Jane's Airport Review, Ben Vogel. Ben, welcome back to the programme. Great to have you with us as ever.
Good afternoon.
Let's start by talking about Russian aircraft, because this has been an intriguing sort of story that's been rumbling for a few weeks now. A number of instances where Russian aircraft have sort of, I don't know, invaded the airspace, if you want to use that word, of some neighbours. What do these kind of things mean?
Well, there are clear implications for civil aviation because Russian aircraft have been entering airspace on the border of the EU, particularly around the Baltic states, with their transponders turned off, which means they're not advertising their position to civilian air traffic control. There's an obvious safety implication to that, and the European Aviation Safety Agency is publishing a report next month into the issue.
What are likely to be the measures then in response? Because, as you said, there's clearly the implication for civil aircraft. I guess there's a wider point about the sort of the political gesturing that's involved. But in terms of the immediate problem, what's likely to be recommended, do you think?
I don't know what practically the European Aviation Safety Agency can do. All it can do is recommend that European governments put pressure on the Kremlin to put pressure in turn on the Russian Air Force to stop doing this.
That might well be easier said than done, one imagines.
I would say it's probably impossible given the current situation and the growing tension there is between Russia and the West over Ukraine and a number of other issues.
So probably want to really sort of watch this space in terms of what the recommendations and the report says.
The air forces in the Baltic states, are relatively recent members of NATO, have been sharing radar data with each other in an attempt to try and cover the gap, but of course it can't be covered entirely. And as we know, in UK airspace recently, there was a penetration by some Russian military aircraft just off the southern coast. So it's not unknown here either.
No, an active problem. Intriguing stuff. Let's move on and talk a bit about, a thing we touched on before is aviation being used as something of a cash cow around the world, with some stories that seem more reasonable and some more outlandish than others. And I've got an example from Latin America, which is, I'd say it's on the extraordinary end of that spectrum.
It is bonkers, quite frankly. The Venezuelan government introduced a tax on breathing the air inside the main terminal at Caracas Airport, the main aviation gateway to Venezuela. It was introduced in July 2014. It has since been quietly dropped, shall we say, because of a number of fairly obvious dissatisfaction and complaints from passengers using the airport to be accosted on arrival and told to pay effectively a penalty just for breathing. It is one step too far, I would say.
I mean, we sort of, it is obviously an entertaining story, and it's little wonder that it's been removed. But there is, I guess, a serious point here, which, how often does aviation as a sector become the victim of what, you've got to call it, I guess, political grandstanding?
That's
really.
Right.
It's an active problem, isn't it?
Yeah, taxation is such a blunt instrument to use on an industry which, if it was left and if it was incentivised to grow, would provide a lot of revenue to government in the form of conventional taxes, let alone the various surcharges that have been levied by regimes such as Venezuela's. But it is a theme. Aviation's in the crosshairs for a number of reasons. The environmental reason, there's lots of taxes on departures and arrivals for green reasons, as well as just more conventional methods of bleeding the passengers.
Let's move on and look at some interesting stats. Well, I guess this is a bit of a game of claim and counterclaim.
Correct.
Dubai, we were talking a little bit earlier in the programme, claiming the crown as the number one airport for international passenger volume.
That's right.
Is this, well, first of all, what do you make of that claim on its own, first of all?
I believe it. It was announced a couple of, about 5 or 6 days ago when all the airports around the world produce their full year figures. And this has been coming for a while. Heathrow's operating at almost 100% capacity. Dubai's adding new infrastructure almost every month, it seems, as well as attracting new services. So there's an air of inevitability about it. But I think the main significance of this will be in the propaganda battle in the UK over airport expansion between Heathrow and Gatwick. Heathrow markets itself as a big driver for the UK economy in the form of attracting foreign business and so on and so forth. By losing its crown as the number one hub for international traffic, Heathrow will probably be able to use this in its intense lobbying effort to say, look, something's got to be done about this. We've got to get back to where we want to be.
Give us a sense, Ben, on that, because this is a very active debate. It's very divisive. People certainly chart the newspapers in this country. This adds to that sense of urgency. But where's it going? Because it still seems that the process is always very inches along, incrementally. Okay, a sense of urgency, but will it actually make any, positive outcome one way or the other more likely to happen anytime soon?
It seems to be turning into one of those classic British committees that wants to produce an answer or claims that it's going to produce an answer, but it does seem to be an element of jam tomorrow about this. I may be proven wrong. I mean, there should be a decision according to the schedule after the general election in May, but depending on the outcome of that election, it could be kicked into the long grass yet again. It all depends on the politics.
I mean, have you been surprised, I suppose, politically, that there's been so little unanimity about the best course forward? Because it seems to be an issue. I mean, there are some political hot potatoes that run for generations, but it seems to be one that's divided people, and they seem to be incapable of coming around to a different way of thinking. Do you think that sort of intractability, are the politicians, I guess is what I'm asking, are they part of the problem here or the solution?
Definitely part of the problem in terms of their prevarication, I suppose. The politicians could take a big lead here. The government could take a big role, but chooses not to because there are votes in play. And with a close general election coming up, they probably don't want to jeopardise some of these marginal or semi-marginal constituencies in or around Heathrow and Gatwick.
Who'd have thought they'd be motivated by short-term political gain? Whatever next. Let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about flight tracking, because there's been a lot of discussion for various reasons about having some kind of international standard, how effective that is, how possible it is. What's the sort of latest on all of this?
Well, here we are seeing some movement. A few days ago, there was a big meeting in Montreal by ICAO, the UN agency for aviation. And as a result, there was a recommendation coming out for a 15-minute standard for flight tracking, which means that every 15 minutes throughout the world, even in areas where currently there's not a lot of airspace surveillance, the technology would be there on board an aircraft to broadcast its position to air traffic control. In other words, the kind of incident that happened in last March with MH370 would be a thing of the past. Now, this standard, it's not necessarily proscriptive. It's performance-based, which means that the airlines will be able to choose whichever method suits them best. There's not a limit to the kind of technology that they could use.
And I wonder, I mean, obviously, cases like the most high-profile, well, possibly one of the most high-profile jet disappearances in history are going to prompt people to ask these kind of questions. Are there also other, more prosaic positive applications for this? I mean, would it, in your view, be helpful to have this sort of system anyway in areas of, additional aviation traffic or this sort of thing?
Absolutely. There is a system already being developed that uses something called space-based automatic dependent surveillance broadcast, or ADSB. And that would apply throughout the world, even in areas where there is a lot of airspace surveillance as a form of a belt and braces safety approach. And the people behind this concept, they are very, very keen to see that applied to as an ICAO flight tracking standard as well.
Fascinating stuff. Ben, we're almost out of time. I just wanted to ask you very briefly about sort of notion of a EC Ukraine air services deal. Again, we sort of started, we've had a couple of crazy ideas discussed already.
Here's another one, yeah.
Is this just a crazy idea?
It is. There's obviously a lot of politics in play, and I think there are a general EU-Ukraine agreements being pushed, but any ratification of this proposed deal by the Council of Ministers would just fly in the face of common sense. Wouldn't work.
There you go. Common sense from Ben Vogel, as ever, editor of Jane's Airport Review. Ben, thanks for joining us here on the programme. You're listening to The Brief.